Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kaelyn. I am a master's student at the University of Oxford studying history, and in the fall I'm going to begin my PhD in history and African American studies at Yale University. I make academic lifestyle content with vlogs and informational videos all about my life as a graduate student, as well as how you too can access higher education. And for today's video, I'm going to be talking about what it was like to study history as an undergrad. I will talk a little bit about the overall study of history, and if you guys want more information on what it's like to be a graduate student in the field of history and African American studies, then please leave me a comment down below and just let me know. And if you guys like videos like this, please make sure to hit that subscribe button, and let's go ahead and get right into it. Alright, so to begin the video, I put up a question on my Instagram asking you guys to submit some questions and some assumptions about studying history as an undergrad. So we're going to go through some of those assumptions now and we're going to break them down. So the first assumption was that you enjoyed history in high school and you just decided to study it in college. So that wasn't actually the case for me. I liked history in high school, but I honestly wasn't very good at it. I didn't like the exams. I'm a terrible test taker, and I didn't like the format. There weren't very many essays, and honestly, I wasn't the best student in high school. I had an overall GPA of a 2.9, so definitely not the model student. But when I actually got to undergrad and started studying at community college, I discovered my love of history because I was actually reading a book on Thomas Jefferson just because I found him to be an interesting historical figure. I was reading about him as a slave owner and the slaves at Monticello. I read this book by Annette Gordon Reed called Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, An American Controversy, and it's actually right here on my shelf. So that was a pivotal book for me. I actually read it just because somebody had mentioned it in passing. I think it might have been my dad, and I read it and it completely changed my perspective on not only history and Thomas Jefferson and kind of the founding era, but it also really changed my perspective on the world around me. It changed my political views, it changed my personal social views on race and gender, and it actually made me question a lot of the things that I had learned growing up. So no, I liked history in high school, but that was not the reason I decided to study it in college. When I was in community college, I actually thought I was going to study business and entrepreneurship. So slight difference from what I had planned on or what my parents maybe had planned on, but I love the study of history and we'll talk a little bit about why throughout this video. The next assumption was that you have limited career prospects other than becoming a teacher or researcher, and this is absolutely false. I want to dispel the belief that studying the humanities will not lead to a successful or equitable career. And the reason being that when you are studying the humanities, you learn critical thinking skills, you learn writing skills, you learn research and analytical skills, and just common sense skills, you learn administrative skills, etc. And I actually worked in medical devices for a little while between my time at UCLA and my time at Oxford, and the skills that I learned as a history student, being able to research, being able to mine databases, and being able to write documents was actually super helpful in my job. And while most of the people that were hired there were from areas in STEM, such as biology, I was one of the only people that was hired from humanities, but I brought in a different set of skills, and it ended up being a very good fit. I was just planning on going to graduate school, so I didn't stay at that job, but you just have to be able to learn how to use your resume to market yourself if you studied history or another area in the social sciences or humanities when you are applying to a technical field. So just keep that in mind, but just because you study history does not mean you have to become a teacher, does not mean you have to go to graduate school. There's plenty that you can do outside of academia and outside of teaching. So this is the last assumption that I'm going to read. The classes are easy. So while they may be easy for some people, I think that it requires a certain type of thinking and a certain type of effort. In history, you write a lot of essays, and being very diligent about doing research is something that's really important if you want to be successful as a history student. You can definitely get by on taking lectures and just doing the bare minimum, but if you actually really want to engage with the discussions in history, then you're gonna have to take some harder classes. I took graduate level courses as an undergrad and definitely had to work my butt off for that. So while it may not be as technical as the STEM fields or even some of the social sciences, I would still say it's a difficult major and that the classes are difficult, but it just depends on which classes you take and which teachers you tend to gravitate towards. So now we're gonna get into the main section of this video, and it's gonna be broken up into a variety of categories. I'm going to apologize ahead of time. This video is going to be very long, but there's going to be a lot of information in it. I'm going to jam pack all of my experiences and everything that I know about studying history. So we're just gonna jump right into it. So what do history students actually study? So the main misconception is that history students just study dates and people and events. And that is absolutely false. I want to dispel that particular myth because history students study patterns, we study human social formations, we study government, we study laws, we study social and cultural changes, etc. People study war and war tactics and naval practices. So there's a variety of different areas that you can dive into, and we'll get into that in a second. But as a history student, my job is to look at patterns in history, look at human behavior, and then try to understand the past from the perspective of the people who lived within it. So being able to use the sources, and there are a variety of methodologies for how to study history and how to write histories, but ultimately you're going to be studying a geographical region as well as a particular type of methodology, whether that be social history or cultural history or legal history. There's a variety of different ways that you can study the actual field of history. So for me in particular, I study the social and legal histories of enslaved women in the colonial American South. I am not going to be talking very specifically about my research in this particular video, but if you guys want more videos on that, then please leave me a comment down below to let me know that that's something you would like to see. So the next piece is, what types of history do you study? So I covered this a little bit, but social history tracks kind of social change during a time of evolution. So for example, there are micro-social historians that will study a particular town before, during, and after the American Revolution. And they want to see the patterns of social formations. They want to see how people are interacting, how that changes the local economy, how that changes the local just social environment and the activities of people. And the sources that they're using are primarily journals. We're looking at primary sources, which are written by the people of the time, and trying to assess how they themselves are envisioning their world changing around them. And then we also evaluate that alongside other primary sources from, say, a neighbor, or we even do comparative histories from one town to another. You have historians that work on a micro scale or a macro scale. You have global historians that do comparative histories in the West and in the East. So there are a bunch of different types of history, and currently there is an ongoing debate on how far history stretches back and when you need to reclassify yourself as, say, an archaeologist. And it also depends on what materials you're using. Historians are known to use newspapers, letters, and other types of written documents. But as the study of history has developed, we've also incorporated other aspects of historical analysis using oral histories, for example. Let's say you're studying a particular tribe in West Africa, let's say Ghana, during the peak of the transatlantic slave trade, and you're trying to actually study their histories. So while they may not have written documents, which is a very Eurocentric view of primary sources, historians are now using oral histories in order to track those histories back in time. This is also important when you think about indigenous histories, especially in America. Oral histories and oral traditions are incredibly important. We also use material resources such as those being used by archaeologists or being dug up by archaeologists. So history also goes into a bunch of different subfields. For example, I study socio-legal histories of enslaved women. So I use methodologies in the field of law, as well as the field of African American studies and gender theory, and so women's studies and other aspects. So historians are not just grounded in one primary definition of what they do and what they are. Historians use a variety of different types of methodologies in order to do their work. So I hope that that was helpful. It was a little vague, but it's really hard to describe exactly everything that historians do because there's a lot. And on top of that, I'm gonna leave some sources down below. You may need an institution that has a subscription to, say, JSTOR, but I'm gonna leave some articles down below about the field of history and what has been said about the responsibility of historians to the material that they're using, and you guys can do a little bit of research on your own if that's something that you are interested in, but now we're just gonna keep going. So what types of classes do you take as a history student? So there are a couple different types of classes that you can take, and this is very specific to the United States, and I am talking about my experience studying history as an undergrad at UCLA. So we're gonna go off of that, but you have to check your institution's requirements. So the 3 different types of classes that UCLA offered were lectures, seminars, and independent research projects. So lectures are basically where a professor will stand in front of a room of, say, 30 to 250 people and will present a lecture using slides and other types of materials. I've had professors that have used music. So they will present their subject for the day, and you are meant as a student to take notes, regurgitate that information, and then you will take a midterm exam and a final exam, or you'll write a paper, whatever it is that that syllabus calls for. One of the main benefits of lectures is that it is a very broad overview of the subject matter. So for example, I took a class on ancient South Asian history and civilizations. And while that isn't necessarily my area of research, it was one of the requirements for my major. And it also allowed me to study a whole other area of history that I had no knowledge of, and learned a lot about religion, social histories of ancient civilizations in, say, Cambodia and Indonesia. So that was a class that I wouldn't have taken had I had to take, say, a seminar. And a seminar is a class where you'll have a professor and probably 10 to 20 students, and it is a discussion. They last anywhere from about an hour and a half to 3 hours, and it is primarily based on a reading or a set of readings and discussion. So these classes often will just have a final paper and sometimes weekly write-ups, as well as reading requirements. These classes are a lot more intensive and require that you do a little bit more work and that you come to class more prepared. You can't just come in and just take notes and then leave. It is definitely more rigorous, but if you are somebody that wants to really understand the field of history, if you want to go more in depth into the material, and if you are considering graduate school, then I highly recommend seminars. One of the videos I'm going to post next week is about if you decide that you want to go to graduate school and what you can do to prepare to apply for graduate school as an undergrad, and I talk a little bit about how to use seminars to your benefit. All right, so then the third type of class is independent research. This is basically where you will find a professor, ask them if they are willing to do an independent research course with you, and you will often meet with them about once a week, and you will set up a reading list with them and other kinds of requirements. This research project can last anywhere from a quarter or a semester to a full year, and this can include doing, say, an honors thesis, or it's another way for you to develop your relationship with your professors and do more select readings in your specific area of interest. So that's one of the other options for courses. So someone asked how vast my education was in history, and so this kind of leads into the requirements at UCLA as well as in community college. So in the California community college system, if you want to apply to one of the University of California campuses such as UCLA or Berkeley, you have to fulfill a set of requirements. For my community college, to apply to UCLA, you had to have 2 Western civilization classes, a US history course, or 2 US history courses, as well as a non-traditional history course. So for me, I took US history classes, I took 2 Western civilization classes, as well as a class on the history of race and immigration in the United States, and that counted for my non-traditional. And then when I got to UCLA, I had to do what's called a 97 seminar, and in this class, it was the seminar format in a subject that I wasn't particularly fond of. I took a class on peasant culture in medieval Europe, and it wasn't really my area of interest. Honestly, I wish I'd taken another class, but it did allow me to take a class outside of my general field of interest, which is early America, the early Republic, Atlantic history, and history in the Caribbean. Some other classes that I took a class on Southeast Asian history, I took a class on African history, which unfortunately was not as specific as I wish it was. This is a whole other debate, but African history at schools even as big as UCLA are quite limited, and there was actually only 2 classes that you could have taken in lecture on the history of Africa, and it was meant to cover subjects for the entire continent, and I just feel like that's insufficient. I wish I'd been able to take classes on ancient civilizations in West Africa and other African history courses, but unfortunately they weren't really on offer. So if you have the chance to take classes outside of your subfield or your field of interest, then absolutely do it. I think that being able to explore other areas in history is important. And this also goes along with the major requirements for schools like UCLA. So at UCLA, you needed 2 US history classes, 2 European history classes, and 2 non-Western classes. So you needed 2 classes in Asian history or Middle Eastern history or African history or Latin American history. I don't necessarily think that's entirely sufficient considering that you were taking at minimum 4 classes in the Western world and then just completely leaving out the rest of it, but to each their own. So one of the questions that I got was how you prepare for graduate school. I'm going to address this in a video next week, so go ahead and stick around for that. And then the last question I'm going to answer is, what skills do you learn as a history major? So you learn to write, for one. You learn how to write clearly and analytically, and I highly recommend doing an independent research project. If you want to develop your research, go to the writing centers, go to your professors, learn to become a better writer. This is something that will be applicable no matter what you do in life, and I highly recommend it. On top of that, you learn research skills, you learn how to analyze certain data, you learn how to analyze sources, you learn how to mine articles and footnotes, and really be able to do in-depth research that goes in more depth than just checking Wikipedia. So you develop research skills, you learn administrative skills in communicating with your professors, organizing your readings, you learn how to read critically, and all of these skills are absolutely applicable outside of the field of history. As I said earlier in the video, I've had jobs in other fields. I was a professional athlete. I have worked in administration, and I've also worked as a researcher at a tech company. So you absolutely can use your history degree to pursue a variety of things. While it might not teach you how to code, you can develop a variety of skills that are going to be applicable in the field of tech or in the field of law. All right, so we've now reached the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. I hope you picked up some helpful information about studying history as an undergrad and that you enjoyed this one. And if you guys are not yet subscribed to this channel, then I would highly recommend that you hit that subscribe button. I leave for Yale in a week and I'm going to be starting my PhD. So there's going to be moving vlogs and lots of PhD vlogs. And I'm really looking forward to the content that I have coming up. So I hope you guys are too. Have a good day. And that is it for this video. See you guys in the next one. Bye everyone.